Lydia didn't know that the wounded stranger bleeding into the forest floor was the most powerful alpha alive. She didn't know that his golden eyes tracked her every movement with the intensity of a predator recognizing its mate, and she certainly didn't know that her gentle touch on his fevered brow had just sealed a supernatural bond that would reshape the very foundations of her broken world. The morning had started like every other in Lord Blackwood's manner. Cold, brutal, unforgiving. "You worthless little wretch!" Blackwood's voice cracked like a whip across the stone kitchen. His meaty hand connected with her cheek, sending Lydia stumbling backward into the rough wooden table. The impact sent fresh bruises blooming across ribs that had barely healed from last week's beating. "You let the fire die again?" Lydia kept her eyes down, knowing that meeting his gaze would only invite worse punishment. Her left cheek throbbed, but she forced herself to stand straight. Survival meant endurance. Survival meant invisibility when possible, and silent acceptance when it wasn't. "Forgive me, my lord," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. 3 years of servitude had taught her that apologies, however hollow, sometimes shortened the beatings. Blackwood's cold grey eyes raked over her with disgusted possession. "You're nothing but a burden. The debt your father left keeps you here, but barely. One more mistake, girl, and I'll sell you to the mining camps. See how long you last there." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Lydia had heard whispers about the mining camps. Girls who went there didn't come back. "Clean this mess and get the fire lit. The Baron arrives tonight, and if anything is amiss—" Blackwood let the threat trail off before stomping from the kitchen, his heavy boots echoing through the corridors like thunder. Lydia's hands shook as she swept up the scattered kindling. Her father's gambling debts had bound her to this place 3 years ago, after the fever took him. 3 years of brutality, of constant hunger, of sleeping on straw in the servants' quarters while believing that this was simply her lot in life. But today felt different. Today something desperate clawed at her chest, whispering that if she stayed another night, she might not live to see another dawn. The sun was setting when Lydia finally made her decision. Lord Blackwood was entertaining his guest with wine and violent stories in the great hall. The other servants were busy with evening duties, and the kitchen was mercifully empty. She grabbed a small loaf of bread, her only meal for the day, and slipped through the servants' entrance into the gathering dusk. The forest beckoned with promises of freedom, even if that freedom meant dying on her own terms rather than under Blackwood's cruel hand. She had no plan beyond running until her legs gave out, no destination except away. The trees closed around her like protective arms, their branches filtering the last rays of sunlight into dappled gold. For the first time in years, Lydia allowed herself to breathe deeply. The air tasted of pine and possibility. She had been walking for perhaps an hour when she heard it, a low, pained sound that was almost a growl, but distinctly human, distinctly male. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking. Strange men in dark forests were dangerous for girls like her. But the sound came again, weaker this time, threaded with genuine pain that tugged at something buried deep in her chest. Lydia found him in a small clearing, collapsed against the base of an enormous oak tree. Blood soaked through his dark shirt, and his face was pale with blood loss. But even semi-conscious and wounded, he was the most striking man she had ever seen. Tall, even sitting slumped against the tree. Broad shoulders that spoke of strength and power. Dark hair that caught the moonlight, and a face that belonged in royal portraits rather than forest clearings. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Golden. Impossibly, startlingly golden, like liquid amber catching fire. And they were looking directly at her with an intensity that should have terrified her. "Please," he said, his voice rough with pain, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I need help." Lydia hesitated. She had nothing. No medical training, no supplies, barely even the clothes on her back. But something in those golden eyes called to her, pulled at her in a way that defied logic. I don't know much about healing, she admitted, moving closer despite every survival instinct telling her to run. But I can try. She knelt beside him, close enough to see that the blood came from a deep gash across his side, close enough to catch his scent, pine and rain and something wild and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "What's your name?" he asked as she began examining the wound, his voice gentler now. "Lydia," she whispered, surprised by her own boldness in sharing even that much. "Lydia." He repeated her name like a prayer, and something warm unfurled in her chest. "Don't tell me," she interrupted, tearing strips from her already ragged underskirt to use as bandages. "If I don't know who you are, I can't be held responsible for helping you." A soft chuckle escaped him, despite his pain. "Wise." As she worked to clean and bind his wound, she became acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his skin, the way her hands seemed steadier when touching him, the strange sense of rightness that settled over her despite the circumstances. "Why are you alone in the forest?" he asked quietly as she secured the makeshift bandage. The question hit too close to truths she wasn't ready to share. "I could ask you the same thing." "Touché." His golden eyes studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead made her feel seen. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Lydia's hands stilled on the bandage. "Aren't we all?" "Not any more." The certainty in his voice made her look up sharply. "Not if you don't want to." There was something in his tone, something that promised safety and protection and things she had stopped believing in years ago. But promises from strange men in dark forests were dangerous things. "I should go," she whispered, starting to pull away. His hand caught hers, gently but firmly. The moment their skin touched, that warmth in her chest flared into something almost overwhelming. Golden light seemed to shimmer between them, though surely that was just moonlight playing tricks. "Stay," he said softly. "When morning comes, let me take you somewhere safe." Lydia stared down at their joined hands. His skin was warm and calloused from work she couldn't imagine, and something deep inside her wanted nothing more than to believe him, to trust him, to accept the protection he was offering. But trusting strange men, trusting anyone, was how people like her got hurt. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "Then trust this." He squeezed her hand gently, and that golden warmth pulsed between them again. "Trust what you feel when I touch you. Trust the fact that you stopped to help a bleeding stranger when you could have kept running." She should have pulled away, should have wished him well and disappeared back into the forest, should have chosen the familiar pain of solitude over the terrifying possibility of hope. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Until morning," she agreed quietly. "Then I'll have to decide." His smile was devastating, warm and grateful, and tinged with something that looked almost like relief. "Until morning. And Lydia, thank you for stopping, for caring, for giving me a chance to prove that not all men are monsters." As she settled against the opposite side of the tree to wait for dawn, Lydia tried to ignore the way her name sounded perfect in his voice, tried to dismiss the strange connection humming between them like a living thing. She had no idea that her kindness to a wounded stranger had just set in motion forces that would make her a queen. The journey to his estate began at dawn, when the wounded stranger proved he was far more than he appeared. Lydia woke to find him already standing, the bloodied shirt from the night before replaced with clean clothes that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. The wound she had tended so carefully was healing with impossible speed, leaving only a thin line across his ribs. "How?" she began, but he held up a gentle hand. "Some questions are better answered when we're somewhere safe," he said, offering her his arm with the same courtesy he might show a duchess. "My home isn't far." The forest path wound upward through ancient trees, and with each step Lydia began to notice things that made her stomach clench with growing unease. The way birds fell silent when he passed, how every woodland creature seemed to bow their heads in his presence, the subtle shift in the very air around him, as if the forest itself recognized his authority. When the trees finally parted to reveal his estate, Lydia's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a home, it was a palace. Massive stone walls rose toward the sky, crowned with towers that gleamed silver in the morning light. Gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry, tended by dozens of servants who moved with the precision of a well-trained army. And everywhere, banners flew with a symbol that made her blood run cold. The silver wolf of the Alpha King. "No," she whispered, stumbling backward. "No, this isn't possible." He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw him without the softening veil of darkness and injury. Tall beyond ordinary measure, features carved with aristocratic perfection, eyes that held the weight of absolute authority, and a presence that spoke of power beyond mortal understanding. This was no wounded traveller. This was the most feared and revered man in the realm. "Your Majesty." The words fell from her lips like stones. I touched you. I gave you orders. You saved my life," he said simply, stepping closer despite her obvious terror. "And you called me by name last night, though I never told you what it was." "I called you?" Lydia's mind raced, trying to remember. She had spoken to him, yes, but surely she had never... "I don't understand." "Marcus?" His voice was gentle, patient. "You called me Marcus when you thought I was unconscious. No one has called me that in years." The memory surfaced like a bubble breaking the surface of still water. She had whispered his name while cleaning his wound, though she had no memory of learning it. It had simply felt right on her tongue, like a word she had always known. "How is that possible?" she breathed. Instead of answering, he gestured toward the imposing entrance where servants had begun to gather. "Come inside, Lydia. Let me explain properly." The great hall took her breath away. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by columns carved from single pieces of marble. Tapestries depicting legendary battles adorned the walls, and a fireplace large enough to stable horses dominated one end of the space. But it was the way every person in the room immediately dropped to one knee that confirmed what she already knew. She was in the presence of royalty, and she was nothing but a runaway servant girl in borrowed clothes. "Rise," Marcus commanded, and the authority in his voice made even Lydia want to obey. "This is Lady Lydia. She is to be treated with the utmost respect and given anything she requires." "Lady." Lydia's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to correct him, but he caught her eye and shook his head almost imperceptibly. An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes stepped forward. "Your Majesty, shall I prepare chambers for your guest?" "The Rose Suite," Marcus replied without hesitation. "And have the seamstresses attend her. She'll need proper clothing." "I can't," Lydia whispered, as the servants began to disperse. "I don't belong here. I'm not—" "You're exactly where you belong." His golden eyes found hers, and that strange warmth pulsed between them again. "Walk with me, please." She found herself following him through corridors lined with priceless artwork, past rooms that spoke of wealth beyond imagining. Servants they encountered bowed deeply, but their faces showed no surprise at her presence, as if the king regularly brought mysterious women to his palace. "How many others have there been?" she asked before she could stop herself. Marcus paused mid-step. "Others?" "Women, ladies you've rescued and brought here." The words tasted bitter. Of course there had been others. Men like him didn't rescue servants' girls without expecting something in return. "Lydia!" He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her chest tight. "In 32 years of life, you are the first woman I have ever brought to this palace, the first I have ever wanted to protect, the first whose touch has felt like coming home." The sincerity in his voice shattered something fragile inside her. "Don't say things like that. Please, I know what I am. I know my place." "Your place is beside me." The words came out rough, almost desperate. "I know how that sounds. I know you have no reason to trust me. But last night when you touched me, something shifted in my very soul. I've been searching for that feeling my entire life." Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the palace. "You don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm the daughter of a gambler who sold me to pay his debts. I've spent 3 years scrubbing floors and dodging fists and believing that this is all I'm worth." Then they were all wrong. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could see flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "You are worth kingdoms, Lydia. You are worth wars. You are worth every treasure in my vault and every drop of blood in my veins." The words hit her like physical blows. Too much, too intense, too good to be true. "I need air," she whispered, backing toward the nearest window. But Marcus was there first, his large hand covering hers on the window latch. The moment their skin touched, that golden light flared between them again, stronger this time, visible even in daylight. "What is that?" she gasped, staring at their joined hands. "Recognition," he said quietly. "The bond that exists between true mates. My wolf knew you before my mind did. That's why you knew my name. That's why your touch heals rather than harms. That's why every instinct I have screams at me to protect you." She jerked her hand away, the warmth instantly replaced by cold emptiness. "Mates? You're talking about fairy tales. I'm talking about destiny." His voice carried absolute conviction. "I'm talking about the reason I've never married, never felt the slightest interest in any of the noble ladies paraded before me. I was waiting for you, Lydia. My soul was waiting for yours." The sheer impossibility of it crashed over her like a wave. Kings didn't have fairy tale connections with servant girls. Powerful alphas didn't risk their kingdoms for women with nothing to offer. "This is madness," she whispered. "You're the Alpha King. I'm nobody. There are laws, protocols, expectations." "There are also choices." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements like she was a frightened animal. When she didn't flee, he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I choose you, Lydia. I choose this connection over duty, this feeling over politics, this truth over convenience." "You don't know me," she protested weakly. "I know you stopped to help a bleeding stranger when you could have kept running. I know you're brave enough to tend wounds in the dark and kind enough to share your only food with someone in need. I know your touch brings peace to places in me that have been at war for years." His golden eyes searched hers. "I know enough." Outside, thunder rumbled ominously, though the morning had been clear. Marcus's head snapped toward the window, every muscle in his body suddenly tense. "They've found us." "Who?" But even as Lydia asked, she thought she knew. Lord Blackwood wouldn't let his property simply walk away. "Stay close to me," Marcus commanded, the gentle lover disappearing as the Alpha King emerged. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, stay close." The palace bells began to ring, their urgent tolling echoing through the stone corridors like a heartbeat racing toward war. And Lydia realized that accepting the protection of the Alpha King meant accepting that some battles were just beginning. The hidden chamber beneath the palace was older than the kingdom itself, carved from living stone by hands long turned to dust. Marcus had led her through a tapestry-concealed passage behind his study, his large hand steady at the small of her back as they descended into darkness. "How many people know about this place?" Lydia whispered as he sealed the entrance behind them with what looked like solid stone. "3, my captain of guards, my head of intelligence, and now you." His voice carried through the darkness, followed by the soft sound of flint striking steel. Warm light bloomed as he lit an oil lamp, revealing walls carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the flickering glow. The chamber was surprisingly comfortable, furnished with cushioned benches, thick carpets, and shelves lined with books and supplies. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a refuge designed for extended stays. "You've used this before," she observed, settling onto one of the benches with unconscious grace. "During the Shadow Wars, when assassins stalked the palace halls." Marcus sat across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. I was barely 18. My father was already dead, killed by the same enemies now circling like vultures above us. Above them, footsteps echoed through the stone floors, heavy boots, many of them, moving with military precision. Lydia's blood ran cold as she recognized the particular rhythm of Blackwood's guards. "They're in the palace," she breathed. "Yes." Marcus's voice held no fear, only cold calculation. "But they'll find nothing. My people know how to handle unwanted visitors." "You don't understand." Lydia gripped the edge of the bench until her knuckles went white. "Blackwood doesn't give up. He'll tear this place apart, stone by stone. He'll hurt your people, and when he doesn't find me, he'll assume you're hiding me and he'll learn why crossing the Alpha King is considered a capital offence." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. "Lydia, look at me." She raised her eyes to find his golden gaze burning with protective fury. "No one will hurt you. Not him, not his guards, not anyone. I would burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let another hand touch you in violence." The fierce conviction in his voice sent shivers down her spine. This wasn't the patient, gentle man who had courted her trust. This was the Alpha King in all his terrible glory, and the power radiating from him made the very air crackle with danger. "You don't know what he's capable of," she whispered. "Then tell me." Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentling. "Tell me what he did to you, Lydia. Help me understand why you flinch when I move too quickly, why you apologize for things that aren't your fault." The invitation hung between them, like a bridge she could choose to cross or burn. Sharing meant vulnerability. Sharing meant admitting to the shame and helplessness that had defined her existence for 3 years. But the golden warmth in his eyes promised safety, and the supernatural bond between them hummed with reassurance. "He bought me when I was 16, she began quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of searching above. "My father owed gambling debts he couldn't pay. Blackwood offered to clear them in exchange for 7 years of my service." Marcus's hands clenched into fists, but he remained still, letting her speak. "At first it was just kitchen work, cleaning, cooking, tending fires. But after the first year, when it became clear my father would never return to claim me, Blackwood decided I needed additional education in obedience." Her fingers unconsciously traced the faded bruises on her wrists. "He had creative methods of ensuring compliance." The growl that rumbled from Marcus's chest was barely human. The lamp flame flickered as supernatural energy crackled through the air. "Show me," he said roughly. "What?" "Show me what he did to you." Lydia shook her head quickly. "It doesn't matter now. I'm here. I'm safe. It matters to me." Marcus's voice carried absolute authority, but his eyes remained gentle. "I need to see, Lydia. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." The bond between them pulsed with his earnestness, his genuine desire to understand rather than judge. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Lydia pushed back the sleeves of the simple dress she wore. The scars were thin white lines across her forearms, precise and deliberate. Burns from kitchen implements used as punishments, rope marks from being tied when she tried to resist, the faded yellow outline of finger-shaped bruises that never quite seemed to heal completely. Marcus stared at her arms in absolute silence. When he finally looked up, his golden eyes had gone molten with rage. "There's more," she whispered, because suddenly she needed him to know all of it. "On my back, my ribs, places that wouldn't show if I wore proper clothing. Lydia." Her name came out broken, barely recognizable. "How did you survive it? How did you stay kind, stay gentle, when surrounded by such cruelty?" "I don't know." The honest answer surprised her. "I used to pray that someone would come, someone would see what was happening and care enough to stop it. But after the first year, I stopped believing in rescue. I just endured." "You were surviving," Marcus said fiercely. You were being brave in ways that trained warriors couldn't match, and you were waiting, whether you knew it or not, for me to find you. The bond between them flared suddenly, that golden warmth spreading through her chest like liquid sunlight. But this time, instead of just feeling it, Lydia could see it. A golden thread stretched between them, shimmering with supernatural light, connecting her heart to his in a way that felt permanent and unbreakable. "What is that?" she breathed, staring at the visible manifestation of their connection. "The mate bond," Marcus said quietly. "It's showing itself because you're finally letting yourself trust me with your pain." "I can't." The words tore from her throat like a physical wound. "I can't trust this. I can't trust you. I can't trust anyone." But even as she said it, the golden thread pulsed between them, calling her a liar. Marcus rose slowly and moved to sit beside her on the bench. She tensed, every learned response screaming danger, but he made no move to touch her. "The bond exists whether you trust it or not," he said gently. "Whether you accept it or not, whether you run from it or embrace it, it simply is." "I refuse it." The words came out desperate, panicked. "I refuse the bond. I refuse this connection. I refuse to belong to anyone ever again." Marcus's soft laughter surprised her, not mocking, but infinitely gentle, tinged with understanding and patience. "The bond doesn't care what you refuse, Lydia." His golden eyes found hers, holding her gaze with supernatural intensity. "It doesn't care about your fears or your past or your certainty that you're not worthy of love. It exists because our souls recognized each other across time and space and circumstance. That's impossible. So was your survival. So was your kindness in the face of cruelty. So was your decision to help a wounded stranger when you could have kept running." He gestured to the golden thread connecting them. "This isn't about possibility. It's about truth." Above them, the sounds of searching had grown more violent. Crashes and shouts echoed through the stone, speaking of furniture overturned and rooms ransacked. "They're destroying your home," Lydia whispered, guilt crushing her chest. "They're destroying objects that can be replaced." Marcus's voice carried absolute calm. "What matters, what can never be replaced, is sitting right beside me, safe and whole and exactly where she belongs." "I belong nowhere." The old certainty felt hollow even as she spoke it. "You belong with me." He said it like a fact as immutable as sunrise. "You belong in my protection, in my palace, in my life. You belong at my side as my mate, my equal, my queen." Queen. The word hit her like a physical blow. "You're insane," she breathed. "Queens are born to it. They're educated, refined, noble. They're not broken servant girls with scars and nightmares. Queens are born when alpha kings recognize their mates." Marcus's voice carried absolute conviction. "Crown or no crown, palace or no palace, you have been my queen from the moment you touched my face in that clearing." The golden thread between them pulsed brighter, as if responding to his declaration. Lydia stared at it, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just protection, not just safety, but belonging, purpose, love, things she had convinced herself she would never deserve. "I'm terrified," she admitted in a whisper. "Of me. Of this, of hoping, of believing that maybe, just maybe, I could be worth saving." Tears slipped down her cheeks. 3 years ago, I would have given anything for rescue, but hope is dangerous, Marcus. Hope hurts more than despair when it's taken away." "Then don't hope." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and when she didn't flee, he gently brushed away her tears. "No, feel what's between us and know it's real. Know that I would move mountains to keep you safe. Know that your worth isn't determined by the cruelty you've endured, but by the light that survived it." The bond hummed between them, stronger now, impossible to ignore. Where his fingers touched her face, that golden warmth spread like healing balm over old wounds. "The bond doesn't care," she repeated his words, testing them. The bond doesn't care, he confirmed. It sees you exactly as you are, brave, kind, beautiful, worthy, and it chose you for me across every possible world. Above them, the sounds of destruction were moving away toward other parts of the palace. But Lydia barely noticed. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, the supernatural connection binding them, and the terrifying possibility that she might actually deserve the love he was offering. "If I stay," she whispered, "if I accept this, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment you touched me in that clearing." Marcus's smile was gentle, patient, devastatingly hopeful. "The only choice now is whether you fight the bond or let it heal you." The golden thread pulsed between them, waiting. The great hall had never seen a confrontation quite like this one. Marcus stood at the head of the massive chamber, every inch the Alpha King, while Lord Blackwood faced him from the centre of the polished marble floor. Between them, tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Lydia remained hidden in the alcove behind the throne, as Marcus had insisted, but she could see everything through the carved screen that concealed her presence. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the two most powerful forces in her life prepare for battle. Blackwood had arrived with a full contingent of armed guards, their leather armour bearing his family crest, a black raven clutching a silver chain. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The raven was a carrion bird, and chains were meant for binding. "Your Majesty!" Blackwood's voice carried across the vast space with practised authority. "I come seeking what was stolen from me." "Stolen?" Marcus's tone could have frozen fire. "Explain." "A servant girl, bound to me by legal contract for 7 years in payment of her father's debts." Blackwood produced a scroll of parchment, holding it like a weapon. "She fled my household 3 days ago. I have reason to believe she sought sanctuary here." The assembled nobles and palace staff watched in breathless silence. This wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a test of royal authority against noble privilege. "Show me this contract," Marcus commanded. Blackwood approached the throne with confident strides, his guards flanking him like an honour guard. But Lydia could see what others might miss: the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the exits. He was afraid, despite his bluster. Marcus took the parchment and read it with deliberate slowness. When he finally looked up, his golden eyes were colder than winter stone. "This document is a bill of sale," he said quietly, "not a contract of employment. The distinction is academic, Your Majesty. She belongs to me until her debt is paid." "She belongs to no one." The words fell into the sudden silence like stones into still water. Every person in the hall seemed to hold their breath. "Your Majesty," Blackwood said carefully, "surely you understand the importance of honouring legal agreements? If servants can simply flee their obligations without consequences. Are you questioning my understanding of the law?" Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Blackwood's face went pale, but his greed overrode his survival instincts. "Of course not, Your Majesty, but I have invested considerably in this girl's upkeep. I must insist on her return." "Her upkeep." Marcus rose from his throne, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Tell me, Lord Blackwood, what exactly did this upkeep entail?" "The usual: food, shelter, clothing appropriate to her station." "And discipline?" Something in Marcus's tone made Blackwood shift nervously. "When necessary, yes. Servants require guidance to understand their place." "Show me your hands." The command was so unexpected that Blackwood blinked in confusion. "Your Majesty?" "Your hands. Show them to me." Slowly, reluctantly, Blackwood extended his hands. Even from her hiding place, Lydia could see the scars across his knuckles, the marks of a man who had made violence his preferred method of communication. "Interesting." Marcus stepped down from the dais, each footfall echoing like thunder. Those are the hands of a man who takes pleasure in causing pain. Tell me, Lord Blackwood, did you find the girl's discipline enjoyable? I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. Marcus was close enough now that Blackwood had to crane his neck to meet his eyes. I'm asking directly, did you beat her? The silence stretched like a bowstring drawn taut. Blackwood's guards shifted nervously, their hands moving toward their weapons. Discipline is sometimes necessary, Blackwood said finally. Surely your Majesty understands that servants must be taught obedience. Obedience. Marcus spoke the word like it tasted foul. And how did you teach this obedience? The standard methods, kitchen implements for minor infractions, rope restraints for attempts to flee, nothing that would permanently damage my property. Property, the word hung in the air like a curse. Your property. Marcus's voice had gone deadly quiet. Is that what you called her? What else would you call a bought servant, Your Majesty? The slap echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Blackwood staggered backward, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, while his guards reached for their swords. I would call her by her name, Marcus said with terrifying calm. Lydia, and I would call her my mate. The gasps that rose from the assembled crowd were audible even through Lydia's hiding place. Noble ladies pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths in shock while court officials exchanged meaningful glances. The Alpha King had just publicly claimed a servant girl as his mate. Blackwood's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and calculating greed before settling on smug satisfaction. Your mate? He laughed, the sound harsh and grating. Your Majesty, surely you jest. That girl is damaged goods, broken by her own father's failures. She's nothing but a debt slave with pretty eyes, hardly suitable for... The second slap came faster than the first, delivered with enough force to send Blackwood sprawling across the marble floor. Kneel, Marcus commanded, and the word carried such supernatural authority that every person in the hall, guards included, dropped to one knee. Every person except Blackwood. I said kneel! Power rolled off Marcus in visible waves, pressing down on Blackwood like the weight of mountains. I am a lord of this realm, Blackwood gasped, struggling to his feet. I will not kneel to... You will kneel, Marcus interrupted, or you will die where you stand. Golden light began to emanate from the Alpha King's skin, and Lydia could feel the supernatural power building in the air like the pressure before a thunderstorm. This was what happened when someone threatened an Alpha's mate. Blackwood's knees hit the marble with a sharp crack. Better. Marcus looked down at the kneeling man with cold satisfaction. Now let me make something perfectly clear. The woman you called property is under my protection. She is my acknowledged mate, my future queen, and the most precious thing in this kingdom. Any man who has harmed her has committed treason against the crown. Your Majesty, Blackwood wheezed, surely you cannot be serious. A servant girl as queen. The nobles will never... The nobles will accept what I decree, or they will find themselves in need of new estates. Marcus's voice carried absolute finality. As for you, Lord Blackwood, you have confessed to torturing my mate. The punishment for such crimes is death. Blackwood's face went white as parchment. Your Majesty, please, I was within my legal rights. Your legal rights ended the moment I claimed her as mine. Marcus gestured, and palace guards moved forward to surround Blackwood's men. However, I am feeling merciful today. You have until sunset to quit my kingdom. If you are found within my borders after dark, you will be executed for treason. Your lands are forfeit. Your title is stripped. Your name will be struck from the noble registry. You cannot do this. Blackwood struggled to his feet, desperation making him bold. I have allies, connections. The other lords will not stand for... The other lords, Marcus said softly, will learn from your example. Touch what is mine and face the consequences. Behind the screen, Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever called her precious. No one had ever been willing to risk their position, their kingdom, their very life to protect her. "Take him away," Marcus commanded. "See that he's escorted to the border." As Blackwood was dragged from the hall, still protesting and making threats, Marcus turned to address the assembled court. "Let it be known throughout the kingdom," his voice rang out clear and strong, "that Lady Lydia is my acknowledged mate and future queen. Any who would harm her will answer to me personally. Any who would question her worth will find their own worth questioned in return." The golden thread between them, visible only to Lydia, pulsed with fierce pride and protective love. "She is not here by sufferance or charity," Marcus continued. "She is here by right of blood, bond and crown. She is here because the moon goddess herself chose her for me, across time and space and every possible world." Lydia's breath caught. He was giving her not just protection, but legitimacy, not just safety, but belonging. "My lords and ladies," Marcus concluded, "I present to you your future queen." The signal was subtle, a slight movement of his hand, but Lydia understood. This was her moment of choice. She could remain hidden, safe in the shadows, or she could step forward and claim the life he was offering. The golden thread between them hummed with encouragement. Lydia rose from her hiding place and stepped into the light. The court's collective gasp was like music. She walked forward with all the dignity she could muster, her simple dress suddenly seeming less like servant's garb and more like the humble attire of a future queen who had not forgotten her origins. When she reached Marcus's side, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "My mate," he said simply, "my queen." "My king," she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The golden thread between them blazed with triumph and joy, visible to everyone present as supernatural validation of their bond. And for the first time in her life, Lydia truly believed she was exactly where she belonged. The days that followed Blackwood's banishment were a revelation. Lydia had expected judgment, whispered conversations, and barely concealed hostility from the noble court. Instead, she found herself surrounded by a carefully orchestrated display of respect that spoke more to Marcus's authority than her own worthiness. But it was the small moments that truly began to change her. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, had served the royal family for 40 years. When she knocked on Lydia's door that first morning after the confrontation, Lydia expected polite dismissal dressed as courtesy. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Aldridge said, dropping into a perfect curtsy. "Please," Lydia began, uncomfortable with the title. "I'm not—" "You are the Alpha King's acknowledged mate, Mrs." Aldridge interrupted gently but firmly. "That makes you our queen, coronation or no coronation, and if I may say so, it's about time." Lydia blinked in surprise. "About time?" The older woman's weathered face cracked into a warm smile. "His Majesty has been waiting for you for years, my dear, walking these halls like a man searching for something he couldn't name. The change in him since you arrived." She shook her head wonderingly. "He smiles now, really smiles. We haven't seen that since before his father died." The revelation that Marcus had been searching, waiting, hoping for her specifically, settled into Lydia's chest like warm honey. She had spent so long believing she was worthless that the idea of being someone's answered prayer seemed impossible. "Tell me about him," she found herself asking. "Before, what was he like?" Mrs. Aldridge's expression grew soft with memory. "Lonely, desperately, heartbreakingly lonely. Oh, he did his duty, ruled fairly, protected the kingdom, made the hard decisions that kingship requires. But there was always this emptiness in his eyes, like he was only half alive. And now? Now he looks like a man who's found his missing piece." Mrs. Aldridge stepped closer, her voice dropping to a maternal whisper. "You saved him, my dear, just as much as he saved you." That afternoon, Marcus found Lydia in the palace gardens, sitting beside a fountain carved with wolves in eternal hunt. She had been contemplating the symbolism, predators frozen in pursuit of something they could never quite catch, when his reflection appeared beside hers in the rippling water. "Deep thoughts?" he asked, settling onto the marble bench beside her. "I was thinking about Mrs. Aldridge," Lydia said quietly. "About what she told me, about you waiting for me all these years." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes fixed on the dancing water. "Did it frighten you, knowing that I had been searching for you specifically?" "Terrified me," she admitted honestly, "but not for the reasons you might think." "What reasons, then?" Lydia turned to face him fully, studying the strong lines of his face, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. "Because it means this isn't just kindness or charity or political manoeuvring. It means you genuinely want me. Not a queen, not a political alliance, not a convenient arrangement. Me, Lydia, the broken servant girl with more scars than sense." "You're not broken?" His voice carried absolute conviction. "Wounded, yes. Hurt, yes, but not broken. Broken things can't heal others the way you healed me." "I didn't heal you." "Didn't you?" Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with gentle reverence. 3 days ago, I was a king without a kingdom. I ruled from duty, lived from obligation, smiled from necessity. I was existing, Lydia, not living. You changed that with a single touch." The golden thread between them pulsed with truth, making his words impossible to dismiss as pretty lies. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This connection, this bond, it terrifies me how right it feels." "Then stop fighting it." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Stop running from happiness because you think you don't deserve it. Stop punishing yourself for crimes you didn't commit." "I don't know how." "Start by trusting me. Trust this." His hand moved to rest over her heart, where the bond's warmth always seemed strongest. "Trust what your soul is telling you, even when your mind screams that it's impossible." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Lydia could feel herself standing at the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay the familiar territory of fear and self-doubt. Ahead lay the terrifying unknown of acceptance and love. "If I say yes," she whispered, "if I accept this bond fully, what happens to me?" "You become who you were always meant to be." Marcus's smile was devastating in its gentleness. "My mate, my equal, my queen, the woman who completes me and allows me to complete her in return." "And if I'm not strong enough? If I disappoint you?" "Impossible." He said it with such finality that she almost believed him. "You survived 3 years of hell and emerged with your kindness intact. You stopped to help a bleeding stranger when you had every reason to run. You stood before a hostile court and claimed your place at my side. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." The golden thread between them began to glow brighter, responding to their proximity and the emotional intensity of the moment. "I can see it," Lydia breathed, staring at the visible manifestation of their connection. "It's beautiful." "It's us," Marcus said simply. "Our souls recognizing each other, choosing each other, binding to each other for eternity." Eternity. The word should have been frightening. Instead, it felt like a promise. "Say yes, Lydia." His voice dropped to a husky whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Accept the bond. Accept me. Accept us." She looked into his golden eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not as a victim or a servant or a woman defined by her suffering, but as someone precious, cherished, absolutely essential to another person's happiness. "Yes," she whispered. The word had barely left her lips when the bond between them exploded into brilliant golden light. It wrapped around them like liquid sunlight, warm and perfect and utterly right. Lydia felt it sink into her very bones, changing something fundamental in her cellular structure. Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest as the supernatural energy swirled around them both. She could feel his heartbeat synchronizing with hers, could feel his strength becoming her strength, could feel the empty places in her soul filling with light and love and unshakable belonging. "Mine," he breathed against her hair, and the word resonated through the bond like a bell tolling. "Yours," she agreed, and felt his answering surge of fierce satisfaction. When the light finally faded, they remained wrapped in each other's arms beside the fountain. But everything had changed. The bond was no longer a tentative thread between them. It was a golden chain, unbreakable and eternal, binding them together in ways that transcended the physical world. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked softly. Lydia took inventory of her body, her heart, her soul. The constant ache of loneliness that had lived in her chest for years was gone. The hypervigilance, the fear, the certainty that she was fundamentally unworthy, all of it had been burned away by golden fire, replaced with something she barely recognized: peace, belonging, love. "Complete," she said wonderingly. "For the first time in my life I feel complete." "Good." His smile was radiant with joy. "Because that's exactly what you are, my missing piece found at last." As they sat together in the golden afternoon light, Lydia marvelled at the transformation. Yesterday she had been a frightened girl running from her past. Today she was a woman who had chosen her future. Tomorrow she would be queen. But tonight she was simply Lydia, beloved, cherished, and finally home. 3 months later, Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked gardens she now helped design, in chambers that had become as familiar as breathing, beside a man who loved her with the intensity of stars burning in the darkness. Marcus was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with those impossible golden eyes that had first captured her in a forest clearing that felt like a lifetime ago. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Good morning, my king." The words came easily now, without the sharp edge of disbelief that had coloured them for weeks. She was queen, not because of birth or politics or strategic alliance, but because she had chosen to love and be loved in return. The palace had transformed around them both over the past months, filled with laughter and purpose that had been absent during Marcus's solitary reign. But the most profound changes were in Lydia herself. Gone was the frightened girl who flinched at sudden movements and apologised for existing. In her place sat a woman who had discovered her own worth through the eyes of someone who cherished her completely. She moved through the palace with quiet confidence, earning respect through kindness rather than demanding it through fear. "The seamstresses will be here soon for the final fitting," Marcus said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. Their coronation ceremony was planned for the following week, a formal acknowledgement of what had been true from the moment she accepted the bond. The golden thread between them had grown stronger with each passing day, visible now to anyone with supernatural sight, marking them as true mates in ways that could not be denied or dismissed. "Are you nervous?" she asked, though she could feel through their connection that he was perfectly calm. "About the ceremony? No." His smile was soft with contentment. "About spending the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Every single day." "You don't have to be worthy of me," Lydia said, sitting up and taking his face in her hands. "You just have to love me, which you do, perfectly, completely, exactly as I am." "I do." The simple words carried the weight of sacred vows. "I love your strength, born from surviving the unsurvivable. I love your kindness, preserved despite every reason to become bitter. I love your courage, displayed in 100 small acts of choosing hope over despair." "I love you too," she said, and marvelled at how easily the words came now. "I love your patience, waiting for me to trust what my heart knew was true. I love your protection, fierce enough to face down kingdoms, but gentle enough to heal old wounds. I love your certainty, believing in us when I couldn't believe in myself." Their morning ritual was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Marcus called permission to enter, and Mrs. Aldridge appeared with a tea service and her customary warm smile. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but there's someone here to see you." Her eyes twinkled with barely contained delight. A young woman claiming to be Lady Lydia's sister. The teacup slipped from Lydia's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of porcelain and morning tea. "Emma," she whispered. "She's waiting in the rose parlour," Mrs. Aldridge confirmed gently. "Shall I have her brought up?" "No." Lydia was already moving, reaching for the simple blue dress that had become her favourite. "I'll go to her." Marcus rose as well, understanding without words that this reunion required his presence. Emma was the only family Lydia had left, the sister she had feared lost forever when she fled Blackwood's estate. They found Emma in the rose parlour, standing before the massive windows that overlooked the gardens. She had grown in the months since Lydia had seen her, taller, more poised, but still recognisably the girl Lydia had protected from their father's worst impulses. "Emma?" Lydia's voice broke on the name. Her sister turned, and for a moment they simply stared at each other across the elegant room. Then Emma smiled, bright and genuine and achingly familiar. "Hello, Lydia. You look the—" She gestured vaguely at Lydia's fine dress, the circlet resting on her brow, the unmistakable aura of happiness that surrounded her. "You look like a queen." "I am a queen." The words still felt strange, but true. "How did you find me?" "The whole kingdom knows about the servant girl who became the Alpha King's mate." Emma's eyes moved to Marcus, taking in his protective stance behind Lydia's shoulder. "Your Majesty, thank you for taking care of my sister." "Thank you for raising a woman worth taking care of," Marcus replied quietly. Emma's smile widened. "She always was special. Even when we were children, she was the one who made sure I had enough to eat, who took the blame when I broke things, who told me stories when the creditors came calling." "You were worth protecting," Lydia said simply. "And now you're worth protecting too." Emma stepped closer, taking in the subtle changes in her sister. The confidence, the peace, the absolute certainty of being loved. "I'm so glad you found each other." They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of months apart. Emma had escaped Blackwood's household shortly after Lydia's disappearance, finding refuge with distant cousins who had taken her in without question. She was learning to read and write properly, helping with their small business, building a life of quiet independence. "I want you to stay," Lydia said as the afternoon light began to fade. "There's so much room in the palace, and I've missed you terribly." Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "I appreciate the offer truly, but I think I need to finish what I started with our cousins. I need to know I can take care of myself before I let anyone else take care of me." The wisdom in her words reminded Lydia powerfully of her own journey, the necessity of finding her own strength before she could accept Marcus's love without losing herself in it. "I understand," she said, "but visit, often. You'll always have a place here." "I will. And Lydia?" Emma took her hands, squeezing gently. "You deserve this. All of it. The love, the happiness, the crown. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." As evening fell, Marcus and Lydia walked through their private gardens, following paths illuminated by crystalline lights that seemed to respond to their supernatural bond. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the warm air, and Lydia thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than this place that had become home. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, noting her contemplative mood. "About how different everything is now. 3 months ago I was convinced I would die in Blackwood's kitchen, forgotten and unloved. Now I'm planning a coronation ceremony and worrying about whether the cake will be sweet enough for the children in attendance." "And how does that feel?" Lydia considered the question seriously. "Like I've been given a second life, like the first 20 years were just preparation for this, for becoming the person you needed me to be, and the person I was always meant to be." They stopped beside the fountain where they had first accepted the bond, the same carved wolves still frozen in eternal pursuit. But now Lydia understood the symbolism differently. They weren't predators chasing prey, but souls seeking their other half, running toward connection rather than conquest. "I have something for you," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. The ring he produced was unlike anything Lydia had ever seen. The band was carved from what looked like crystallized sunlight, and set within it was a stone that seemed to hold captured starfire. But it was the supernatural energy radiating from it that made her gasp. "It's been in my family for generations," Marcus explained. "The coronation ring, worn only by queens who are true mates to their kings. It's said to glow with the light of the bond itself." As he slipped it onto her finger, the ring blazed with golden radiance that perfectly matched the thread connecting their hearts. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her hand. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's yours," he said simply, "as am I, as everything I have and everything I am belongs to you." "And I'm yours," she replied, meaning it with every fibre of her being. From that first moment in the forest to this moment in our garden, to every moment that will follow until the end of time itself. They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promises, while the bond between them pulsed with contentment and joy. Around them, the garden seemed to approve, roses blooming brighter and crystalline lights dancing in celebration of their love. When they finally broke apart, Lydia looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Do you think she's watching?" she asked quietly. "The moon goddess?" Marcus followed her gaze upward. "I'm certain of it, and I think she's pleased with her handiwork. A broken servant girl and a lonely king. Two halves of the same soul finally united." His arms tightened around her waist. "Exactly as she planned." As they walked back toward the palace, Lydia marvelled at the journey that had brought them here. Pain had led to healing, fear had transformed into trust, and despair had blossomed into the deepest love she could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring the coronation ceremony, making official what had been true in their hearts for months. Next month would bring diplomatic visits from neighbouring kingdoms, eager to meet the queen who had captured the Alpha King's heart. Next year would bring challenges and triumphs and all the complicated joys of ruling together. But tonight was simply theirs, a moment of perfect peace in a love story that had already become legend. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts about Lydia and Marcus's journey in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps me share more tales of love conquering all odds. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with someone brave enough to help a stranger in the darkness.